Hello and good morning, everybody. My name is Amanda, and I'm coming to you live from the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California. And I also want to apologize to anyone who might have been trying to watch our earlier program this morning. We had some technical difficulties here, so we're unable to record it. But if you were waiting for that one and you're here for this one, thank you for your patience. And we are really excited that you're joining us, and we invite you to participate along with us today by calling the number you see on the screen with any questions at 562-286-1838. And actually, I should clarify, we're asking you not to call, but rather to text. So you can text in any questions that you have, any comments that you'd like to share to this number, 562-286-1838. Now, if you're watching this at a time after we've recorded the program and you're watching this on our YouTube channel or through some other link, you're also welcome to ask any questions that you have by emailing them to live@lbaop.org. I'll say that again. Email live@lbaop.org, and one of our educators will be happy to respond to your questions. So what we're going to be doing today is looking at the ocean and talking about ocean exploration. Now, if you think about the ocean and you think about exploration, I'm kind of curious to know what kinds of ideas come to your mind. So if you are watching this and you want to text us in, we encourage you to text us in any questions or comments that you have, but I want you to take a look at this right now. So here we have a view of the ocean. When I say ocean, many times this is what comes to my mind. When you're looking out at the ocean, is this what comes to your mind? How would you describe what you're seeing here? Well, I'm noticing there's not a whole lot of anything but water and sky in this view. In fact, if you look at the horizon here, I don't see like a big landscape of a bunch of mountains or anything like that. It looks very flat, like a long, flat line. So between the ocean and the sky, it's pretty flat. The surface of the ocean is flat. We don't see hills of water anywhere, right? So we usually think about it being very flat, and in this case, very blue. And boy, it just looks like it goes on and on forever. The ocean is huge. In fact, you might not realize it if you look at a flattened map. If you look at a map and you can see where the continents are and where the ocean is, you might notice that it's split up into different sections. But if you were to look at it on a globe, you might be surprised, especially at the Pacific Ocean, because of course we focus on the Pacific Ocean here at the Aquarium of the Pacific. I encourage you, if you get a chance, to get a globe out and look at it and turn that globe to the side where the Pacific Ocean is. And you might be surprised at just how much you see. So here we have just a flat map, and we're often, seeing things like this, like, okay, yep, there's some blue here, there's some blue here, there's some blue here. But boy, if we were to really focus on just this side, look at how big the Pacific Ocean is. It's really a big amount of space. And so if you were to turn the globe and look at it, just the Pacific Ocean, it would take up most of that side of that sphere that you'd be looking at. So it's massive. I also want you to notice something else when you're looking at this. Look at how, well, actually, there might be a couple things you notice. So I invite you to text in any observations that you make. But look at how it's kind of this one big area here, and we call this the Pacific Ocean. But then we call this the Indian Ocean over here. And we think about oceans as being separated by land. But in this case, you'll notice, well, it's not completely separated. There's space where the water can travel down here. There's space where the water can mix up here. So the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean are all still kind of the same ocean. Well, what about the Atlantic Ocean? We think, oh, well, it's on, one side of Africa is the Atlantic, the other side is the Indian. But again, look down here. Wow, this water in the Indian Ocean flows right into the Atlantic Ocean. And then the Atlantic Ocean right over here, is there any way that the Atlantic Ocean water can get all the way to the Pacific? Of course it can. Actually, right down here, it can move all the way over and share the water down here. So the ocean is huge. It takes up so much of our planet. We have more ocean and water on our planet than we actually do land. Well, when we think about exploration, you might think about land explorers, people who've explored areas of land, or maybe you've gone exploring. Maybe you've been on a hike before and you've, maybe climbed up rocks and you've climbed mountains and hills, or you've, gone down into the valleys. Well, and into forests, or I don't know if you've done much exploring in the desert. Maybe you have. There's lots of different areas of land, and they can vary greatly from one place to another. But I want you to think about how exploring in the ocean might be different. Why would it be different? So again, if we're looking at the ocean here, this is a different view than what we had before. Before we were looking at the surface. And when we look at the ocean from the surface, we might get confused and think that everything's the same. It looks like the surface is the same. It's all flat. And so everything on the bottom of the ocean must be flat too. But that's not always the case. And it's not always the same depth, of course. Now, you probably know that already. But I want you to think about what parts of the ocean might be shallow, what parts might be deep. And is it a gradual increase or decline in the depth? Or could it be different in different parts? Well, we didn't really know. We can't really tell by just looking at the top. If we stayed in a boat on the surface of the water, we could still explore the ocean. We could see what kinds of islands are out there. We could learn about what types of marine life might be found there as they come up to the surface, or as birds dive down and we realize that, oh, there are other animals feeding on things in the ocean here. But how do we explore it? What kinds of tools would we need? And why is it different than exploring on land? Well, first of all, if you've done some exploring on land, you realize you can use your feet. It's one way that you can get around. Now, using your feet alone in the ocean isn't going to be as helpful for you. You might have been to the beach before and you walked into the waves. Now, did you ever notice how powerful those waves can be, though? And they might kind of knock you around a little bit. And you probably haven't been very successful just walking straight out into the ocean. Now, maybe you're more familiar with a lake or smaller areas where you're like, I have no problem just walking straight out into the water. But certain areas, it's going to be a little bit more difficult with those big, powerful waves pushing you, and also the other types of things around you. Now, maybe you've been to a beach and it's a nice sandy environment, but maybe you've been to a beach where it wasn't so sandy, but instead kind of rocky and lots of other things on your feet that you felt as you were walking in. So the environment in the ocean can be different. It could be filled with rocks. It could be nice and sandy. There could be coral reefs around you even. So different parts of the world are going to have different parts or different types of habitats in the ocean that you'll be experiencing as you go out into it. But again, what kind of tools would you need to help you explore this better? How could you prepare? If you go hiking, you might put on your hiking boots and grab something to help you walk. But what about the ocean? How would you move well through the ocean? And then even if you move well through the ocean, can you use your regular senses like we use on land? Can you breathe just as easily and look around and see things just as easily and hear things just as easily as you can when you're in the ocean? Well, obviously not. We would have to hold our breath, and you won't get a lot of exploring done just between breaths. So fortunately, you may know what someone could use, a diver could use going into the ocean. To help them stay under longer, they can use scuba. So yes, we have developed ways, thank you, Mr. Jacques Cousteau, for developing self-contained underwater breathing apparatus, known as scuba gear, that we can use to put a tank on our back, and we can still breathe by putting a regulator into our mouth so we can stay under longer and we can do more exploration. But again, the other tools that you might want to put on your body, and here's one using some scuba divers using that tank on their back right here with that regulator coming into their mouth so that they can breathe. You can see the bubbles coming out here. In fact, there's a lot of divers here in this picture. And you know what? It's probably good that they have those scuba tanks on them, because what do you think they might be doing in here? It looks like whatever it is, it looks pretty involved. What types of tools do you see them using? Well, even looking at their body, how are they able to see what they're doing? Well, they have masks on. And masks are important because it provides a layer of air, basically, between the lenses of our eyes and the water, so that we actually have some space. Because if we just take those off and we open our eyes underwater, things are still kind of blurry. So having goggles or a mask or a way that we can see better is a great tool to help us explore. And then, of course, air that we can breathe so we can stay underwater. But, of course, looking at their feet, those fins make them a little bit more like a fish, and they can get through the water more easily. Now, for them to stay down there, though, they also need to have a weight belt on, because notice, if you stay underwater for a really long time, have you ever been out in a pool or out in the ocean and you start to get really, really cold? Maybe it wasn't so bad at first, or it was bad at first and then you get used to it, but after a while, you're going to get really cold. Well, a wetsuit is really important to help us regulate our body temperature and keep us warm in the open ocean, or wherever we are in the water. And so they're prepared. They're preparing their body so they don't get too cold. They've got their air to breathe, their goggles to breathe or to see, their fins to help them move, a weight belt to help keep them down, because with that wetsuit on, it actually will trap air and make them a little bit more buoyant too. And so the neoprene suits that they have they tend to float. So having a weight belt to help them stay down longer is great. And when they need to get back up, they can actually pump air into their vest and help them to rise. So they're well equipped just with what they're wearing on their body so that they can explore better. But what kinds of things do you notice them using? It looks like this one. What do you think this is? This long yellow, looks like tape. Is it an underwater tape measure maybe? So it looks like they're measuring something. There's also this big long line here. Now we can't see in this picture what it could be attached to. So maybe it's a weight. Maybe it's, they're trying to make sure that their lines are even, because when things in the ocean and it might be hard to tell if you're doing a straight line compared to the rest of the ocean or not. And so it looks like these other divers have something else with them. It looks like they're looking at the bottom. So these two might be measuring something, and these ones might be looking for more information. They might be collecting data, information. Maybe they're counting things. Maybe they're looking for organisms that are looking in here, living in these different spaces. And they're all kind of on different sides. This is on one side of this line. Those are on the other side of this line. Well, this is something that researchers and explorers might do, is create transects. So they create like these lines, and they study and look for certain things in these measured lines. So these measured distances that they have to see what's there what might be living there, what they can discover. And then they can keep track of how many organisms are living in a particular area. So those are some tools that they could use to explore. Now, this probably isn't too deep. We can still see pretty well. There's a lot of sunlight coming in from the top. But now think about exploring deeper in the ocean. What happens? You are diving in a pool and you go down to the bottom of the pool. Do you ever feel anything different in your body? Have you ever felt anything in your ears? Why is that? Why would you feel something different in your ears as you go deeper in the water? It's because of the pressure. So the pressure that you feel around you increases as you go deeper. There's a certain amount of pressure on our bodies just as we walk around, even at sea level. But then as we go deeper in the water, that pressure increases. And we can feel it even at the bottom of maybe an 8-foot deep pool. So imagine going down deeper and deeper in the ocean. In fact, look at this picture. What do you see, or what do you notice here? Now, there's a few things you might notice. I'm noticing that it doesn't look nearly as light as it did before. Notice the dark background here. It almost looks like you could be in a forest at night. But this is not a picture of the starry skies at nighttime in the forest. This is something underwater. So again, very dark water. You're not getting any sunlight coming through. But I do notice those things floating in the water. This stuff in the water we call marine snow. And it's not snow cold that falls from the sky. Instead, it's those pieces of, kind of like, organic matter. So that could be something, it could be waste from an animal. It could be the shedding of the skin of something, the leftovers when someone was eating something. When I say someone, I mean some animal. So these are little pieces of organic material from living organisms that are just kind of floating around and settling down into the water. But I also see this thing coming up. It almost looks like a big stack of smoke. In fact, that's pretty much what it is. Did you know that there are underwater volcanoes and there are what we call smokers that are underneath the ocean? So right here, this looks like we're getting some gases coming from the bottom of the ocean or coming from the earth that's covered underwater. Kind of interesting. If you think about a volcano, for instance, the volcano is an opening on the earth that is allowing magma and that kind of come up to the surface and kind of vent out. So this pressure under the earth is kind of making its way out of the earth, and we see volcanoes. Well, there are also underwater volcanoes, and there's these underwater vents, and we can have white smokers and black smokers depending on the type of chemicals that are coming out of them. So it could be sulfur, it could be some other things that we can see right here. This actually looks kind of blue, but it creates these chimneys where there are these deposited materials that start to grow, and they kind of change the bottom of the ocean and how the ocean looks on the underside. So even though we think about the ocean being flat at the surface, at the bottom, the ocean might look different. Now think again, take a step back and think about land, and think about how the ocean looks, about how the land looks. If you're in Southern California, we can actually go out, we can see the ocean, but we can also look over and see mountains. And so there are mountain ranges. You can probably think a couple mountain ranges, maybe you can think of from school, that we have in the United States. Or maybe you're watching this from another country and you can think of some mountain ranges that you're familiar with. And so we know mountains can go up, can come down, but then there can also be these big valleys in between. And in the ocean, we have both of those things. We have mountains and we have valleys and trenches. So what we're looking at here is actually the bottom of the ocean. Now, of course, it's not really these colors, but this is something that explorers and scientists will use to help us understand what we're looking at a little bit better, and using what we call false coloration. So this coloration that we're seeing, it doesn't really look green and yellow underwater, but it is showing us something else. So over here, we have a little legend of colors. So these colors are showing us different depths. So how deep underwater something is. So the colors that are the deepest, like the trenches, maybe the lowest parts of the mountains in the ocean, are going to be like this pinkish purplish color. Whereas the shallower areas that would be closer to the surface of the water, so the taller parts of the so-called mountain underwater, would be red. So here we can see the top that's kind of red, and it's this whole entire mountain that's covered up by the ocean. Now you might think, how can the ocean cover up an entire mountain? I want you to think about the biggest mountain. All right. Now I have my microphone back on again, so hopefully you can hear me. But this is a submersible they use to explore the deep sea, and this is called the Limiting Factor, right? Is that the name? Okay. Limiting Factor is the name of this submersible, and this allowed this explorer named Victor Vescovo to go and visit the deepest part of the ocean, not just once, but several times. And now he was able to take back other people to go explore the deepest part of the ocean. And so now there have been, I believe, 22 different people just since 2019. That's what our total has become, of people who visited the deepest part of the ocean. And one of the people who got to visit was the son of Don Walsh, the very first person who explored the ocean. And so that's really exciting that now it seems that we've come up with technology and new ways that we can withstand the pressures of the deep sea and be able to take people down to see it and explore it. And scientists can learn even more about these things that we normally couldn't see. Now, I also want to point out this picture, and I forgot, who is the photographer on this one? Okay, well, we'll get back to you. But this was taken by another photographer who had this man took down a styrofoam cup. So he's holding a styrofoam cup. That was a normal size when he went down. But when it's taken to the bottom of the ocean and it gets compressed, this is what it looks like because styrofoam holds its compression. So when he came back up, that's what that little styrofoam cup looked like after being under all that pressure. Kind of interesting. So they can withstand pressure. We can look out and see new things. Now, of course, if we look at parts of the ocean that seem unusual to us, we'd like to maybe know, like, what are those things? When someone first noticed this, they're like, well, we don't know what's coming out of there. We don't know, like, what is the water temperature like here? Because normally in the deep sea, it's very, very cold. But we've actually found around these deep sea vents that it can support a variety of organisms and marine life because it is actually kind of warming up the water around it, and it's providing a space where animals relying on chemicals to breathe can survive. So we oftentimes think about needing oxygen to breathe. Most things need oxygen to be able to survive. And they usually get it from plants and photosynthesis, from plants that are taking in the sunlight from the surface. But when you get to a point where there's no sunlight that can reach, how is oxygen going to be created? Well, there's some animals that use chemosynthesis instead of photosynthesis, so they can breathe with the chemicals. And they're able to do that through things like these deep sea vents too. So pretty fascinating as we're learning more about the types of organisms that live in the deep sea, as we're able to not only just explore it, well, some people with their own eyes, which is pretty amazing, but we've also learned a lot recently about the deep sea by using other tools. So this is actually really exciting too. This is Dr. Catherine Sullivan, who is also an astronaut. She was out in outer space and she has been out above our planet. And now she was the first woman to visit the deep sea. And this is also a photo taken by Caledon Oceanic, and they provided for us. But she got to now go down to the deepest part of our own planet. So I don't think there's anyone in the world who has spanned the distance that she has from outer space to the deepest part of the ocean. So it's very exciting. We're living in an exciting time where we are learning more about the ocean that we share a planet with. And we're hoping that maybe some of you watching will be involved in exploring more of the ocean. Now, again, if you have questions, you can text them in to us. You can email us at the number on the screen. And we would love to be a resource for you if you have questions about even how to get involved in ocean exploration, because there's a lot yet to be discovered and a lot to be learned. But one of the most important ways we've been doing this, and you can even do it yourself live at home, is you can use something like, well, you can use your own computer and go to nautiluslive.org, and you can actually see research and exploration in the ocean as it's being done real time. So right now there is probably a boat somewhere that is out exploring the ocean, and you can actually see what they're seeing through the eyes of their ROV. Now, have you heard of an ROV before? ROV means remotely operated vehicle. And a remotely operated vehicle is just like a remote control car where you sit in one place with a keypad, joystick, and you're able to, with a little controller, and you can control what this deep sea vehicle is doing, this vehicle that goes under the water, even to the deepest parts of the ocean. And so you don't have to have a person in it. You can just send this machine down, and it can look like this. And it can explore things like shipwrecks and give us insight into things we've never seen before or that we didn't even know were down there. So ocean explorers might use tools like mapping tools. In fact, that's one of the ways that we discovered the Titanic. So Dr. Robert Ballard was out on a ship, and they were mapping the seafloor when they discovered something very interesting. And it seemed like the seafloor had some funny little shapes to it. And the way they're able to do this is by sending out beams of sound that go down to the ocean, and they bounce back up to a receiver, and they're able to kind of put a picture together. Kind of like how a dolphin can use echolocation. They send out clicks and whistles, bounces back to the dolphin, and they're able to visualize what's in the water in front of them and kind of see a visual picture. Well, we have equipment that can do that to help us understand what the bottom of the ocean floor looks like, where those mountains are, where those trenches are, and they found the Titanic. So that is very interesting. But the Titanic is not the only ship that has ended up at the bottom of the ocean. So we've been able, through using ROVs, these remotely operated vehicles, so no one is actually sitting in this, but you'll notice it is connected. They have a wire going up, so it can be controlled, and we can even grab things. We can grab samples from the ocean. We can take pictures. We can collect like what the bottom of the ocean feels like. We can just get a really neat view that normally we wouldn't get to have. Notice also there are lights on here because we're exploring areas that are so dark we normally wouldn't be able to see. So having those lights is really important. It's probably the first light some of those organisms have ever seen. But there are all sorts of tools that we're able to use to explore the ocean, and you can actually be a part of exploring it by going to nautiluslive.org. And I believe there's even a new website, I wish I could remember what it was, that will link you to a few different ocean exploration vessels. The Okeanos Explorer is by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The Nautilus is by, Dr. Bob Ballard's boat. And then the Falcor is also another research vessel boat that goes out and does ocean exploration that you can actually see their cameras, and you can type in questions to the explorers and scientists who are operating it, and they can answer it right back to you. So I encourage you to check those out. Do a Google search if you'd like. And I hope you've enjoyed thinking about the ocean, the challenges that exist in discovering it and learning more about it, but knowing that we're now living in an age where we are able to explore more about it. And so maybe some of you will be inspired and want to be a part of that. Maybe you're someone who likes playing video games, and maybe you could be a controller for one of these ROVs, telling us more about the planet we live on. So thank you for joining us today, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye.